Chasidus on the Parshas Vaeira. So we're going to learn a piece from the More of a Shamash. We're going to learn it out loud. We're not going to read it on the inside, but I put it up on the screen in case you want to see it for reference. So the More of a Shamash quotes a pasuk that says, "Vayikach Amram es Yocheved Daidasai." So in this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu is taking the mantle of leadership of Klal Yisrael. He's going to be going in front of Paro as the representative of the Jewish people. So the Torah wants to take a minute and give us a little bit of the background of the genealogy, the yichus of who Moshe Rabbeinu is. And so it says that Moshe Rabbeinu's father, Amram, took Yocheved, his aunt, to be a wife. Now, it's a little perplexing. Many Mefarshim are perplexed by this pasuk because here's the thing. The Torah later on is going to forbid a nephew and an aunt to get married. So how come it is that the union that produces Moshe Rabbeinu, Miriam, Aaron HaKohen, that union that produced those children is a union that one day would be forbidden. It's very strange that Hashem would arrange it to be that way. And this is something the More of a Shamash is going to deal with, and many of the Mefarshim deal with. Now, on a very technical level, I believe I saw this in the Me'am Lo'ez, and it's also, I think, a Gemara. They say that before the Torah was given, and everybody had the status of what we call a Ben Noach, the forbidden unions would only come through the mother. So, for example, if you had a man who had a child with a woman, and then that woman had another child with another man, well, those two children could not get married even before the Torah was given because they came from the same mother. But if you had a man be together with one woman, and then that same man was together with another woman, and they produced the children, well, before the Torah was given, that would be allowed because they don't have the same mother. But after the Torah was given, all of that, any type of sibling, is prohibited. And so this is before the Torah was given, and it could be that, granted, Amram and Yocheved both stem from the Levi, but the woman that Levi was together with is not a similar woman between the two. And so that's how it could technically be allowed. Now, that's just a technical answer for why it would have been permitted, but it doesn't answer about why Hashem would arrange it this way. I mean, it didn't have to be this way. You don't have to rely on that heter, so to speak. We didn't have to. I mean, why did Hashem arrange it this way? So that's question number one. And then another question is just not necessarily limited over here, but we know that the Torah has a rule that a man cannot marry his aunt, but a man could marry his niece. So it kind of seems like there's some sort of imbalance. So the More of a Shamash is going to explain why this is allowed, and we're not going to do it on a technical level. We're going to do it more from a spiritual level. And so what he says is the whole world can be broken down into Zakar and Nekeva. There's masculine and there's feminine. And it's not limited just to people and manifestation of sex. Like, for example, there's like some sort of masculine and feminine, even when it comes to names of God, whatever that means. Okay, that's beyond our pay grade, but we know it exists. So it exists even outside of man. And very simply, masculine usually is a giving energy or giving force, and feminine is a receiving one. Now, that does not necessarily mean one is worse or one is better than the other one. They're different and they're equal and they're both necessary. So neither one is better than the other one. Now, the masculine, since it is the giver, so to speak, just has to be bigger in size. Now, once again, if it's bigger in size, does not mean it's bigger in status. Okay? Say, size doesn't matter in this regard. But since it's giving over, well, it has to have what to give over and still be intact on its own. So therefore, technically, it always has to be bigger. So that's how a relationship works. So when you have an uncle and a niece, this nature is still preserved. But when you have an aunt and a nephew, that is not preserved still, because here's the idea. What makes somebody greater could be their proximity to the past. Because we know in Judaism, we believe in a concept that, unfortunately, and I've seen it with my own eyes, the more time goes by, the less we are connected to Mount Sinai. In Judaism, we call this Yeridas Hadoros. That as we get farther and farther away from our connection to Moshe Rabbeinu and our connection to Har Sinai, unfortunately, we see the generations keep falling. And so when you have an aunt who is an earlier generation, so she's going to be greater than if she were to marry her nephew. He doesn't have what to impart to her because she's greater than him. There's not as much of a need. But with the uncle and niece, that type of relationship is still preserved. So now that just explains really question number 2, right? And that's only on a spiritual level. type of explanation, Kabbalistic, spiritual level explanation. But it doesn't explain question number one. In fact, all it does is make question number one even more pressing. So why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu arrange it that Amram and Yocheved would end up producing the union of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam? I mean, this just compounds the question and makes it even stronger. So what he wants to say is that there's a lesson here. You see, there is an exception to this rule. There is one exception to this rule, to that the thing from the earlier generation and the idea of giver and receiver, all that stuff that we just brought up. There's one exception to that rule, and that comes to Limud Torah. You see, David HaMelech, it says in Pirkei Avos, called Achitopel his teacher. Here, I even pulled it up on the screen. This is from Pirkei Avos. Haloimin mechaver perak echad o halacha achas o pasuk echad o dibur echad o afilu ois achas tzarich lenoig boy kavod shekein matzinu b'David HaMelech shalolam and me'achi toipel elishnei devarim bilvad and kro rabo alufo umiyodoi shenemar va'ata enosh ke'erki alufe miyudai. One who learns from his fellow one chapter, or one halacha, or one verse, or one word, or even one letter, is obligated to treat him with honor. For so we find David, the king of Israel, who learned from Achitopel no more than two things, yet called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend, as it is said, "But it was you, a man, my equal, my guide, and my beloved friend." So meaning like this, think about it like this. David HaMelech was the greatest of all Klal Yisrael, right? He's the highest level, he's the king, he's a Navi. And look, he calls Achitopel, who only taught him two things. Look, you look at the continuation of the Mishnah. Halo devarim kal v'chaymer. Ma David melech Yisrael shalo laman me'achitopel el shnei devarim bilvad. Kro rabo v'alufo miyodo. Halo mi mechavero perak echad o halacha achas o posuk echad o dibur echad o afilu os achas al achas kama v'kama tzarch le'noig boy kavod. So look, is it not an instance of argument from the less to the greater, which we call Kal V'chomer? If David, the king of Israel, who learned from Achitopel no more than two things, nevertheless called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend, then in the case of someone who learns from his fellow one chapter, one halacha, one verse, one word, or even one letter, all the more so he is under obligation to treat him with honor. Now, what does that mean? Meaning Achitopel obviously was, David HaMelech being the highest level prophet, being the king of Klal Yisrael, yet he happened to teach David HaMelech two things, just two things. And look, David HaMelech gave him so much kavod, so much honor. So meaning when it comes to Torah is the rule, meaning that you can teach somebody Torah even if you are on a lower level than they are. Another Gemara says that I learned more from my Talmidim, from my students, than I did from my teacher. Meaning this idea of that in order for the Zachar and the Keva and the relationship to work, the bigger one has to be giving over to the smaller one, and the smaller one has to be a receiver. That is only true in like everything else. But when it comes to Torah, that is not true. The thing that is smaller, has the ability to give over to that which is greater. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted people to see this and learn this. Why? Because somebody might think that, look, I'm a big Talmud Chacham. This guy doesn't know anything. This guy over there, he's been learning for 2 minutes, okay? But in theory, it is possible that somebody heard one little thing that you've never heard. But you might feel embarrassed to ask that guy about that little thing. Because you know why? Oh, look, everybody's going to think I'm a nebuch now. I'm a loser because I don't know that one little thing. But we see that Kadosh Baruch Hu arranged it, that Moshe Rabbeinu, the person who would give over the Torah, be the greatest person of Klal Yisrael, came from a marriage where there was this imbalance. Why did he arrange it that way? He arranged it that way to teach us that when it comes to Torah, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who represents the bringing and giving down of the Torah, he came from a marriage where even the small one was giving to the big one. So too, when it comes to Limud Torah, right? You shouldn't be afraid to ask somebody smaller than you. And there's no embarrassment when it comes to Torah. So we have to humble ourselves and take lesson from the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu and humble ourselves to learn Torah.